Ladies and gentlemen, if you take your seats, that'd be very welcome. Thank you everybody for joining us this beautiful evening, and a warm welcome to the session focusing on mainstream justice into global critical raw material consumption and production. My name is Gibbon Huang. I am the former global coordinator of the Children and Youth Major Group and the current head of outreach and partnerships, and I'm very pleased to be guiding you through today's session. I'd like to warmly welcome our speakers, and of course, thank you to all of you for joining us in this conversation. I'd also like to take this opportunity to express our gratitude to the government of Portugal and the International Resource Panel for co-hosting this session together with the Children and Youth Major Group. Let me now introduce to you what we're going to be talking about during this event. In just a moment, I'll hand over to Her Excellency Ana Filomena Rocha, Ambassador of Portugal to Kenya, for her welcome remarks. We will then hear from Ms. Ligia Noronha, Assistant Secretary General and Head of the UNEP New York office, and we will then move to a panel discussion moderated by Professor Isabella Teixeira, co-chair of the International Resource Panel. We will close with a Q&A, which will be the opportunity to ask all of your burning questions. Now, before we proceed, I'd just like to share a few thoughts to frame this discussion. There's been growing global momentum around the issue of critical raw materials and the role in enabling the green and digital transitions. This is reflected in the accelerating race for minerals and metals, including, of course, lithium, cobalt, graphite, nickel, and rare earths, as well as other emerging and minor materials. According to the International Energy Agency, demand for these materials could increase sixfold by 2050. These materials are, of course, key to building renewable energy infrastructure, electric vehicles, and other key energy infrastructure, which makes them essential tools in our response to the climate crisis. But we are facing a dilemma as the extraction and consumption are driving significant environmental and social implications. These environmental costs include anything, as you know, from land degradation to ecosystem destruction to water contamination, and this impacts the communities that rely on these resources, including health, water, and food security. While, of course, there's plenty of money to be made in CRM extraction, most of these benefits are not distributed equally. High-income countries reap most of the benefits of refining and producing the high-value add and-use goods that use CRMs, while the developing countries that are exposed most to the impacts do not benefit equally. So the decision-making power over where and how minerals are extracted also doesn't sit with the affected communities. There have been many recent initiatives to address the social and environmental impacts of critical mineral extraction and consumption. This includes, of course, the UN Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals, and we are in the midst of some very complex negotiations on a resolution tabled by Colombia and Oman. There are also various other national mineral strategies, as well as multi- and plurilateral strategies through the G20 and G7 frameworks, but most of these focus primarily on trying to maintain or meet domestic demand requirements, rather than addressing the justice dimensions of this. And this is precisely what we want to discuss today. The speakers today are going to talk about the dimensions of justice from different perspectives. They will address questions of procedural justice, whether we have fair governance mechanisms that provide a voice to communities, questions of distributive justice, whether the benefits and costs are distributed evenly, and questions of restorative justice, how to repair past harms. With that, I'd like to hand over to Her Excellency Ana Filomena Rocha, Permanent Representative of Portugal to UNEP, to deliver her welcome remarks. Your Excellency, over to you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, friends, distinguished youth leaders, indigenous representatives, and members of the civil society. It's a pleasure to join you today. Let me begin by thanking the Children and Youth Major Group for their leadership, continuous engagement, and for challenging us to organize a joint side event for the second time in the UNEA. My gratitude also goes to Mr. Ligia Noronha for being with us today, and for Mrs. Isabella Teixeira for guiding this panel with her clarity and wisdom, and to all participants who are gathered here for a conversation that is both timely and necessary. We meet at a moment when the transformation towards low carbon and digital economies is accelerating. This is encouraged. It shows that ambition is rising. But it also means that the pressure on natural resources and on communities is increasing. The surge in demand for critical raw materials is already reshaping economies and geopolitics. What it is at stake is not only how quickly we can decarbonize, but how fairly we do so. A transition that leaves people behind or undermines ecosystems cannot be called a transition at all. It's just a shift in pressures. Portugal approaches this debate from a perspective shaped by both our national realities and our long-standing commitments. We are an Atlantic country, a nation whose identity and economy are deeply linked to the ocean. This is one of the reasons why Portugal was the first country to announce a 50-year moratorium on deep-sea mining. It was not a symbolic gesture. It was a prudent decision based on science and the conviction that the ocean's health cannot be compromised for short-term gains. At the same time, we also recognize the opportunities and responsibilities associated with the green transition on land. Portugal has been investing heavily in renewable energy, in circular economy policies, and in preparing our workforce for the profound changes ahead. From vocational training programs in green technologies, to environmental education at schools, to upskilling workers in emerging sectors, we have learned that the success of transition depends on people. These efforts resulted in Portugal being on the top 10 worldwide regarding the percentage of renewals in our national energy mix. This is why the notion of a just transition is central to our approach. A fair transition ensures that workers are not displaced without alternatives, that regions dependent on extractive industries are supported, and that communities benefit from the value generated by the resources they steward. It also recognizes that intergenerational equity must guide all decisions. The jobs that we create today cannot come at the expense of the prosperity of tomorrow. We very much welcome today's discussion on resource justice. We must improve transparency across value chains, strengthen environmental governance, and ensure that communities have a meaningful role in shaping the policies that affect them. Their knowledge, their expectations, and their experience are essential for legitimate and durable solutions. I thank you all for being here, for your commitment, and for the seriousness with which you approach this global responsibility. And I'm looking forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. Next, I would like to invite Ms. Legia Noronha, Assistant Secretary General and Head of UNEP New York office, and invite her to deliver her keynote remarks. Over to you.
Wow, this is strong. Excellencies, dear friend Isabella, ladies and gentlemen, I'm absolutely delighted to be here. This is a topic that I've been engaged with probably all of my professional life, because the focus has been that we do not have a sufficiently robust system of governance in the minerals sector. And therefore, we have a lot of injustice that happens. So I'm so delighted that the youth and major groups, along with the government of Portugal, have taken this decision to have this and highlight this, because it is so very important. I also want to say that we've been working very closely with the Secretary General's panel, and I'll speak to that in a minute. But I want to make 3 points. One, that the minerals development model is out of balance. Equity and justice must become the main compass of any model for resource justice. For the politics of resources, as you'll hear Isabella speaking, cannot be done without putting into it as central the idea of justice. And this is not just in countries, but also across countries. As the International Resource Panel work shows very clearly, there's a lot of imbalance between countries in the consumption of resources. But all of the impacts of production are very often in the developing world. So there is injustice between the developed and the developing world, but of course there's injustice within the countries, which you know very well, and that's why you're having this particular panel. We got involved as UNEP into this whole discussion on critical energy transition minerals. We've been involved with minerals for a long time, but why we've got involved with the critical energy transition minerals is because we knew that these were needed to address the energy transition for climate change goals, but at the same time, it was very clear that the rapidly rising demand and rapidly rising interest in critical energy transition minerals would impact biodiversity, it would create pollution, it would create social costs, it would affect indigenous rights, and there's a whole lot of environmental and social issues which would be affected. And so to address one environmental problem, we would be creating a lot of environmental and social problems to address this one problem, and that is what we needed to avoid. We knew this was important, but we knew that to address, the answer could not be creating more environmental and social problems, so there had to be a balance. But the focus cannot be just on consumption or just on production. It has to be on both sides. And that is why we've been focusing on both sides of the equation, because there are lots of the externalities of mining from production, but there's a whole question of consumption. Who's consuming? For whom? For what? Can we in any way look at this issue of consumption differently? I will not go into the details of the impacts, but I'll just list a few. More than 200 additional mines will be needed to meet projected demand for copper, nickel, lithium, cobalt, and graphite. Resource extraction is responsible for half of global emissions, carbon emissions, which is what the IRP Global Resource Outlook spoke of. 50% of global copper and lithium production takes place in areas which are already having water stress. You also have half of the land containing energy transition minerals being owned or managed by indigenous people. So how is it that we bring in their rights, their voices, their decision-making into the discussion that we want? So a clean energy future has to be built on a just minerals transition, not just transition, but a just minerals transition. And so we want to also highlight the fact that we cannot focus just on supply, but also on the demand side. And how do we do that? If we are serious about balancing this, we must see where is it that we can make a reduction in the demand for the critical energy transition minerals by looking at where is it that you can reduce the demand for energy, and where is it that you can address energy in energy deficit countries. And so you need to do that rebalancing between the developed and the developing world, and within countries where there is, in the developing world, where there is an overconsumption of energy. And so you need justice even there. So justice, as you mentioned earlier, the moderator mentioned, it's about distributive justice, procedural justice, as well as restoration justice. So in the context of reducing pressure on the resource base itself, we're looking at transforming materials and energy efficiency in all sectors, because that will reduce the amount of the minerals that you need. Redesigning mobility, housing, industrial systems to meet human needs with fewer materials. I'm sure Isabella will speak to that. They talk of provisioning systems in the Global Resources Outlook. Building a truly circular economy in which minerals remain in use for longer and are recovered, reused, and repurposed. But I want to make this point where I make it every time I speak about circular economy, especially in the context of minerals, but also in textiles, is that when we look at circularity in the context of minerals, we must also look at how do you share the benefits from the value that is created across the supply chain, across the value chain of minerals. Because every unit that is created which adds on to the value, if some of it does not come back to the original owners, then again you have a loss of the values to those who do the value creation, but there's no benefit to those who might therefore have a reduction in demand. So in order to avoid that you get countries saying, no, we don't believe in circularity because you're actually reducing the demand for our resources, you need to already strategically think how are you going to add to the royalties that they already get from the minerals, also a share in the value that is created through the circularity. Now, so demand reduction, circularity are not optional. They're very much part of the whole justice strategies and justice thinking that you're going to be talking about. I want to talk a little bit about the point that you made about the Secretary General's panel. The idea was to look at the issues which were so important, not just environmental issues, but benefit sharing, value addition, just transition, all of these. And I was very, very involved through the New York office of UNEP in supporting the Secretary General with this panel. And so, feel free to ask me any questions because this has been a passionate year of trying to, more than a year now. So the panel set out 7 guiding principles, as those of you who've read it will know: the human rights, the environment, justice and equity, fair investment and finance, so not just investment and finance, but fair, benefit sharing and value addition, transparency and anti-corruption, cooperation and multilateralism. This is what you may find in you talked about the resolution that is being discussed there. This was also in resolution UNEP 6.5 or 6.5, and it was there in the earlier resolutions too. How do we talk about collaboration between countries to address this issue? Now, in these 7 principles, to UNEP, the most important one is, of course, principle 2, which is safeguarding the integrity of the planet and ecosystems. But we don't believe we can do this in isolation of the social and the other concerns, social and economic. So you need to phase, and we need to look at the whole issue of environment with the perception of different stakeholders who are there, because that will make a difference. But I'll give you a few pointers of where we're looking at. Strong regulatory frameworks before, during, and after mining. A lot of countries have them. What they may not have is enforcement capacities. Inclusive land use planning and community participation, avoiding, minimizing remediation pollution. Legacy mining and looking at the issue of legacy and restoration is a big central part of this, because there are 5 actionable recommendations, of which legacy mining is one of them. Decarbonizing production, reducing emissions, halting biodiversity loss, and declaring no-go areas where production is limited or is not allowed by making protection critical. So the whole idea of weak sustainability, strong sustainability needs to be thought about. And of course, reducing demand and rethinking the systems. Tomorrow at 12:20, we will be announcing the launch of the UN task force on taking forward these principles, because you can have the principles and then nobody does anything about the principles. So the UN has come together, and it's a really good example of the UN80 initiative, where you have UNDP, UNCTAD, UNEP, coming together with the Executive Office of Secretary General to be looking at how we start implementing some of these principles. And we really, really wish and hope that you can join us in this. This is not a UN-only thing. The UN is just the force trying to push the agenda forward, but we can only do it with your help. So the panel was made up of multiple stakeholders. We had, we had 20 governments, but we have NRGI, we had IRMA, we had the indigenous peoples groups, we had the youth groups, we had all of them represented in that panel. The panel was made up of 32 different stakeholder groups, and of course industry, because if you don't have ICMM and the industry represented, you will not create the change that you need. So just to end here, a net zero world cannot be built on models of the past. They cannot be built on models that were unjust. Today's generation and today's needs require a completely different idea of how we do this. And we think that the critical energy transition minerals, or critical minerals altogether, provide us a great opportunity to change the paradigm of thinking in the mineral sector by making it truly for the people, for the planet, and for prosperity, because at the end of the day, the idea is also that this can help promote sustainable development in a lot of these countries. So how do you bring this together, that balancing? And this is where I'm going to stop, because I know that the wonderful panel here will go into the details of this, but the idea is to try and bring a new balance, a balance which is fundamentally based on justice. Thank you very much.
Now, I'll welcome the panel, moderated by Professor Isabella Teixeira, who is co-chair of the International Resource Panel. We have Ms. Daniela Duran-Gonzalez, Head of International Affairs at the Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia. We have Ms. Chirasa Lee, Indigenous Representative and a Stop Seabed Mining campaigner. We have Ms. Beverly Besmanos, National Coordinator of the NGO Bantay Kita. We have Ms. Cohen Lee, Green Economy and Resources Focal Point at the Children and Youth Major Group. Professor Teixeira, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Welcome, girls, all you women. So you solve all the problems, okay? Absolutely. It's a new world, okay? A just and fair world, okay? So welcome. I try to facilitate our dialogue, okay? So I have some questions, and I ask you to try to answer around 5 minutes, okay? Could you survive? Is it good? So let's go. I think that Ligia and also your madam, you shared some views, very important when you go into the new context of the world to discuss nature. Sometimes people have difficulty to understand what nature means. Okay, this means that natural resources are part of this, and also materials, etc., etc. And we are discussing, Ligia, in my understanding, with a new age. We are moving from fossil fuel age to mining age and digital age. And this means that resources are the basis on any decisions, driving the future or back to the past, unfortunately or fortunately. The second thing here is very important to observe is that when you go into nature or resource, meaning we need to understand it's not used to be discussing climate change or climate politics based on energy transition because we have fossil fuels as the roots of the problem. But indeed, we need to change the global economy, okay, because this is based on energy. It's not only energy. Now we have land as part of this new equation if we go to solutions, okay, because we're fully dependent on land, not only because of natural resource or nature, but because of indigenous people, traditional communities, and we go also in cities. We need to manage this to understand how we allocate efficiently to be fair and go into development. The third point here that I understand could be very interesting, only to provoke you girls, okay? Only girls, this is fantastic, you know? is that circularity is more than a new way to approach economy. Okay, circularity is really a lifestyle. We understand how we can be together because we have a circularity approach. Okay, and this is very complex sometimes to understand why you're so closer. You're not like the other side of the world. This is really a planet that we need to understand how nature brings us together. So circularity must be understood, as Ligia highlighted here, something that we need new ways to approach this. And sometimes it's not only based on waste or based on the end of value chains, for example. Okay? And of course, that we need to add value, consider transparency, justice, etc., but more than this, people must understand that we need to try to learn how to take risks, considering the vulnerabilities that we have today in the next years for developing the world. So I'd like to invite you to share your point of views, okay, considering this debate, justice and global critical raw materials consumption production. We have been discussing and debating and working together on sustainable consumption and production. I remember that we proposed to have SCP as the SDGs, and it was really a hard task. You cannot imagine what's happened 10 years and 15 years ago, okay? But now we have the new understanding about sustainable consumption and production. It means lifestyle. It's not lifestyle the traditional way, but what we trust, what we believe, okay? So I'd like to invite now, if you agree, to invite, who will be the first? Mrs. Daniela, from Colombia, okay? You have the floor. And I'd like to provoke you. Daniela, as you know, is the head of International Affairs of Ministry of Environment and Sustainable Development in Colombia, okay? And I'd like to provoke you, if you agree, that every country shares varied demands on metals and material, etc., because of national reality is also not only industry, but our perception about nature and about development, okay? And despite the varying views and slow progress made from the multilateral process, what are the national level policy options to better shape these mineral supplies and demand while incentivizing environmentally sound and just practice across minerals value chain? And if you allow me, I'd like to provoke you, if you have this national perspective, how to come regionally, for example, to drive this experience with Amazon countries basin, for example. We're invited to have 5 minutes. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, and good night, dear colleagues. It is a pleasure for me to be here with you today with friends, but also it's a privilege to be talking with the child and youth major group as well about this, because this is about our future, right? I still consider myself young, so it's about our future. And I'm going to return and to answer that question also in a provocative manner, because we have thought a lot at the national level, and we have a lot of challenges around illegal mining. And what we are trying to think at the national level, because and these discussions go beyond fossil fuels, but now we have them at the center of the discussions on fossil fuels, because we are thinking about the conference that we are organizing in April in 28th and 29th in Santa Marta on the just transition away from fossil fuels, and we are thinking about what pathways are possible for that. And part of our thinking is how do we diversify the economy without creating further inequalities, without creating further risks, without affecting right holders, and without creating a new extractivist model. And this is the question that it's at the center of much of our national planning right now. How do we tackle the issue of illegal mining in our country? How do we tackle the risks of mining in general? But also how do we diversify an economic model that is strictly unfair in a matter that it's less unfair, less unequal, and that do not reproduce an extractivist model? So there is a lot that I can share about our national view on this. How are we implementing policies to address illegal mining? How are we working to tackle the big heads of the illegal mining and not the people that it's actually doing that, but the big networks that are driving this? But what we are finding at the national level is that what we can do nationally has a lot of limits, because this is an international trade chain. So I'm going to give you our example. For example, we have a lot of problems with illegal mining of gold in Colombia. And what we are realizing is that we're trying a lot to combat this and to tackle this with different approaches, but what we're finding is that the gold that is being extracted illegally in our country is entering legally international value chains. So there's a limit of what we can do in that sense. And we need cooperation and international cooperation and a strengthened multilateralism to tackle this. So in order to enhance our national policies, in order to enhance the work that we're doing in trying to make due diligence a part of the mineral extraction in our country, processing and use, and as much as we're trying to combat illegal mining, not from the people that it's there, but from the big chains, illegal chains that are driving this, we're finding that this is not enough, and that we need enhanced international governance, multilateralism, and cooperation to deal with the trade value chains that are incentivizing illegal mining in our country, because it's easy to put that in the markets, because we do not have traceability, we do not have accountability, and we do not have due diligence at the global level. So the resolution that we are putting here with our colleagues from Oman, who are there, it's also, among other things, trying to advance that need that the panel of the Secretary General has already identified, to strengthen the international cooperation and to continue us governments working together to fulfill the governance gaps that we have, so we can actually have global value chains that enable the effectiveness of our national policies to address due diligence, environmentally sound, and rights-based approaches for critical minerals, or for minerals and metals in general, but that can also enable us to work towards a diversified economic model that does not reproduce extractivism. And I do not want to take much time because I did not prepare talking points, so therefore I could spend a lot of time talking, and I do not want to do that. But I just want to finalize with our reflection about what's happening with our resolution right now. And it's that all we're trying to do at this point, after compromising a lot, it's trying to enable a dialogue on government so we can continue discussing how do we enhance that international cooperation, how do we advance policy options. But not only with governments, we want to have this dialogue with those that are directly impacted by the lack of due diligence, traceability, accountability on minerals, which are you, children and youth, indigenous peoples, people of African descent as well. And we're having a lot of barriers for that. And that leaves a lot of questions of where are we standing, colleagues, in terms of international cooperation and multilateralism to tackle the imminent crisis of our future. And I believe that's a question that we all need to pose. How are we going to advance, to close this international cooperation and multilateralism gaps and challenges so we enable effective policy implementation at the national level? And how are we going to cooperate to have a more due diligence, traceability, human rights-based approaches towards minerals and metals, and how we are going to overcome the challenges that international multilateralism and cooperation are posing to us, so we can actually coordinate to do this. And that's a question that I will leave open because I do not have the answer yet. So thank you very much for inviting us, and looking forward to continue the discussions with you all. And thank you also for putting this topic at the table. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'd like to provoke you a lot, okay, but I don't have time for this, unfortunately. For example, outside multilateralism, we have been discussing minilateralism. It's based on mining age, for example. And you need to understand, for example, that some countries are part of this initiative and coming to drive fair development based on a new argument for international cooperation. We need to be prepared for this transition process that we have around the world. And I particularly understand that it's very important to have the debate about the resolution, but we need also to understand where we are. So we're not only discussing anymore, in my understanding, energy transition or fossil fuel transition, we're discussing energy addition today in the world. Okay, and this is the part how minerals are coming as leisure management to make sure that we can move faster in the transition for renewable energy. And this means energy addition. Don't forget it, because outside our world, we have another reality that are struggling, coming together based on the same interests. We try to come to provoke or to set back, for example, as you mentioned, transparency and also civil rights, et cetera, et cetera. So the debate, the political debate is so huge and so strategic today, and I understand that the resolution could come not only for dialogue, but to make us understand the new challenge that we have today. And I'd like to invite you, Jurissa, would like to introduce yourself, okay? And please, can you give your perception about how IPMG consistently highlight indigenous people and communities not merely as stakeholders, okay, but as right holders in the global CRM governance. It has also continued discussions on the safeguarding of rights to free, prior, informed consent, FPIC, principles across extractive activities. Extractivism is really a new debate about the new economy also. What are the practical ways forward to successfully bring indigenous people into the decision-making table and ensure the livelihoods and the well-being of indigenous people are not infringed upon, while the benefits and risks of extractive activities are equitably shared? And also, if you can add the final comment about co-responsibility when we have indigenous people at the table, okay, and how we'll be committed after the decision process to be co-responsible to reach the outcomes that we need. Welcome, introduce yourself. Yes, this is the real world. Oh, you have your mic, sorry. No, go there. Okay, like mine? Oh, sure? Go there.
Kia ora koutou, my name is Jurissa. I live in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and my heritage is from the northern tribes in New Zealand and out throughout the Pacific, the Cook Islands, Tahiti and Samoa. So as you can imagine, as an ocean person, as a descendant of the Pacific Ocean, I have a very real interest or stake in the emerging seabed mining and deep sea mining industry that is eyeing up our home. And I call it our home. I like to remind people that that is my home, because what we're hearing from this emerging industry is a reference to this place nobody lives. And we're being told that our opposition to the mining of the last great frontier on this planet is us standing in the way of addressing justice or injustices that are happening in terrestrial mines elsewhere in the world. Pacific people would say that our homes are more ocean than land. And so on that, I would like to share, and this might challenge a lot of views in the room, but my Pacific worldview is my Pacific Indigenous worldview is that we should not leave anyone behind. And my opinion on I guess mining in general, because this is what history has shown us, but particularly with this emerging seabed mining, deep sea mining industry, is that there is no such thing as safe or sustainable mining. And I would challenge anyone to show me an example of where mining has happened and it has not left environmental degradation and social and health issues for the communities that it has left behind. There's a reason why it's called a boom-bust industry. And maybe to actually answer your question, what I'm seeing here, actually, let's go back. The mining industry, the world that we live in today is one where the dominant power, the dominant mindsets and the dominant cultures are not at all Indigenous. And what I know of Indigenous knowledge systems that my ancestors held and that my people try very hard to hold on to today is that they are restorative and regenerative, and that we see ourselves as part of the environment, and that we understand that our health and the health of our people is tied to the health of our environment, and in particular our ocean, and so we must maintain a reciprocal relationship with the environment. And I've kind of lost my thought there a little bit because I'm trying to get to the question, but the idea of circularity is this new term to some people, but it's Indigenous knowledge. It's an Indigenous concept where all human activity has an impact on the environment, but the way that I have been raised is to always be aware of that and to be purposeful and careful in the way that I do that, so as not to make as little impact as possible. But this is difficult when the dominant culture and the dominant mindset incentivizes something else. And so practically, now I'm answering your question, what we need is power sharing. That's the problem. In these rooms over here, Indigenous people are completely powerless. And we can see that in the text of almost every single resolution. We are not even mentioned in many of these resolutions. And in the ones that we have been mentioned in, we're being relegated to informal informals, and we are being discussed right now. There's an informal right now, and the topic of that is Indigenous peoples, and we're not even in that discussion. When we talk about not about us, without us, that's exactly what the people are doing here. So that shows you who holds the power. And we've been hearing all week, Indigenous peoples are so important. We need their voices, but they're not walking the talk. And that INF is demonstrating that. That's the proof that I'm sitting here talking to people who probably agree with me somewhat, but I'm not talking to the people who hold the power and are making the decisions. They've been invited, but very few are here listening to this. And so practically, it's about power sharing, and it's about upholding rights that we've already been afforded as well. We have UNDRIP. We've been banging on that our people have come before us and spent 30 years fighting for UNDRIP. Our rights already exist in international law, and yet people elsewhere, and just up the road there, are completely ignoring it. Did I answer your question?
Yes, you try. It was good. I'm thinking about different things now, and but when you go to discuss inequality, so not unfair process, for example, in resource, a natural resource, you cannot forget the footprint, the resource footprint. Today is so unequal.
Indigenous people don't use the term resources. It's treasure.
Yes.
Not a resource.
So if you would know,
that's the mindset, is that we call it a treasure, and so we treat it like a treasure. And another way of looking at the world, we call it a resource, and take and take and take.
So, okay, but coming to my world, okay, we're going to use resource, and even if we go to run in a different way, as Leisure highlighted here, as a fair, etc., we need to recognize the inequalities that we have today. For example, for developed countries, it's from 6 to 10 times the times more use, we allocate more resource for developed countries than developing countries. It's so unequal. So it's really hard to move from where we are to address inequalities and to be more fair if you don't have a new understanding about where we are and how would you like to drive the future. Okay, and this is very, very important because for the multilateral system and for the new international cooperation dynamics, how we could come together, not based on inequality, but the ambition to be more fair. And this is really something very sensitive. That's why I ask about co-responsibilities, okay? When you give the first step, the second step, the third steps, means that you need to be committed with the outcomes, but how to avoid setbacks in the future. And this is probably the problem that we had in the past when reach with good outcomes and not able, for example, to drive these solutions, keep walking based on this. For example, deforestation and going to organized crime. Okay, I have when I was minister in Brazil, I had the lowest rates of deforestation in Amazon region. Why my society was committed to have setbacks on this and to make indigenous people more vulnerable than the past, or coming with infrastructure investment and also to provoke additional damage, or coming to restore degraded lands without understanding how the restoration could play a positive, really positive role, for example, for housing based on wood industry, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to connect the dots in a way that we can mobilize people to avoid setbacks. And I trust that your people knows a lot about this. But I'd like, because we don't have much time, okay, and I'd like to invite you, Beverly, would you like to introduce yourself? And please, I'd like to ask you about the existing multilateral environmental agreements, okay, and international instrument. How can the future global minerals governance system look like? Please tell me, I'm very curious. And in a way that we will ensure sustainable and just mining practice, minimize adverse community impacts while still supporting national interests to meet growing CRM demands for energy transition and other purposes. Come on, probably we'll need to rediscover the world. But please, we have the floor, and I manage the time because I have time here. Thank you very much for joining us, okay? My pleasure to meet you.
Okay, thank you so much. So my name is Beverly Basmanos. I'm the National Coordinator of Bantay Kita, or Revenue Watch in Mining in the Philippines. So we are closely working with communities impacted by nickel mining and other transition minerals. And we are the lead civil society in the Philippines sitting in the Philippine EITI, the Extractives Industry Transparency Initiative. So the question is about how can we move forward and what does a global critical minerals governance look like. So I would like to, I would like you to understand our perspective from island communities in the Philippines hosting transition mineral mining. By the way, our communities, we refuse to use the critical minerals as a term because the minerals are not the ones who are critical for us. What is critical for our communities are the water and food. It may be critical for other countries, but not for our island communities who are hosting the transition mineral mining. And just to let you know that our country only contributed to 0.3% of greenhouse gas emission at the global level. But we are one of the most vulnerable countries to impacts of climate change. We have a series of typhoons. We already have the letter V, no, from at the end of the alphabet, A to V, in 1 year. Now we are in the Typhoon Verbena. Before we had the Typhoon Yolanda. So that's how we named our typhoons alphabetically every year. And in the next 5 years, we already have the names prepared already by our government. That's how typhoons are very frequent in the Philippines. And then, we are second to Indonesia in terms of nickel reserves. So we produce nickel for, they said it's for energy transition, but we hope that it's really used for technologies, for energy transition. Because right now, we don't know if our nickel are really being used for energy transition and for whose transition. And then with this call on energy transition, that there is a need for energy transition, of course we support that. And so our country is looking at 190 new mining operations in the next 4 years. And all of this, most of this will happen in the indigenous peoples areas. It's good in our country. I think we're the only country who have the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. It's a special law that protects our indigenous peoples. But there are some islands who are traditional communities who are not indigenous, and they are not protected by any special law. And that's how it's very difficult for them to take part in the governance level. So on question of how are we going to look forward, we need to transition. So what does the global governance of critical minerals look like? This is how we look at it in our national perspective. We want to see a national level operationalization of the previous UNEA resolutions on minerals and metals. There are already good resolutions, but did our country operationalize that at this level? I would say no, because nickel mining will not take place tomorrow or in the next few months. Nickel mining has been there in our country in the last decades, and all the impacts are already exacerbated and have not yet been addressed. And so now our country is using the energy transition as the narrative that we need to mine more and more and more. And so now what we want to look at is how do we operationalize all these resolutions? So we are looking at sub-nationalization or localization of initiatives. Sometimes it's so difficult for at the national level to initiate policies and implement policies. But what we see in the Philippines is there are opportunities for localization of initiatives. Yes, we don't believe in responsible mining. Based from our context, we don't see any responsible mining happening in the Philippines. But maybe we can do something, we can change some systems that will help communities to get their justice that they want. And we want adherence to standards like the EITI, transparency, beneficial ownership, civic space, greenhouse gas emission reporting of our mining companies. And we also want communities' meaningful participation in all the value chain of mining. We're also looking at helping indigenous peoples' communities manage their royalties from the extractives. And we want our government to step up. So if other countries are having these agreements or would want to invest in mining in our country, maybe the countries would include in their agreements that government should be very careful in terms of monitoring all the environmental and social impacts. I think that's one very good thing. 90% of our nickel goes to China. And when I was asked, how can the investments of Chinese on mining can help our communities? The first thing that I would answer is that maybe China, as a government, can demand accountability from our government that before they give money, before they invest, they should make sure that all these things, environmental and social impacts, are being monitored by our government, because right now it's not happening. Even with the EITI, there is transparency. Mining companies are being awarded for being transparent. But what for? What's the value of transparency if you do not address environmental and social impacts? What's the value of transparency when our people, communities and indigenous people, cannot read and write? No signal, no electricity. Online portals are useless. And so that's what we want. We want to develop our downstream industry. Right now, mining industry only contributes to 0.8% of our GDP. If you smoke and you drink in the Philippines, you contribute more, far, far more than mining. So why do we need mining in the first place? And then we said it's for the transition, but maybe it's not for our own transition. But we hope that localization of initiatives from the international and at the national level, that can be a hope for us to be able to get justice and for us to be able to really transition. Thank you.
Yes, you have really good points. Congratulations. I understand that standards is the first step. We need to move the piece ahead to know more about which other languages could be used that could share realities, understand the specificities of local realities, but come internationally, not only because we have best practice, because we have a new way to use nature and to come to provide development. The other side of the coin is just a little different perspective, because we need to understand, for example, how to be fair when you have a situation that I cannot explore, for example, mining minerals like fertilizers in indigenous land, because the indigenous people don't want in the country, or because we have law limits or legal limits, but this country can buy it from another country from indigenous land. And this is the real world, okay? So it's very interesting when you go to international perspectives to understand how the countries are coming to bring together not this indigenous land or indigenous communities, and to make sure that we can come into standards to have really an innovative situation that we could be fair if you buy or if you're able to produce. As Ligia mentioned, consumption and production, and this is the demand. Who is demanding things, and why does demand things? Okay, and this is very interesting because this will be absolutely based on economic sectors, and in your country cannot have this, but in other countries will have this, and this is happening today. Or when you go into the bilateral cooperation, this is very important when you highlight, for example, China, or in other countries like India, emerging economies, etc., even Colombia. That's why I asked about regional cooperation, okay? It's important to understand the role of bilateral, trilateral cooperation to facilitate the outcomes that you'd like to have globally, or come into the multilateral system to facilitate how we can reach some agreements, because bilateral understand facilitates things, okay? It's very interesting. Pay attention to what's happening in tropical agriculture in the next years, consider the demands in international markets, okay? So I'd like to invite you, Co and Lee, to have the floor. Introduce yourself, please. I know that's a green economy and resource focal point. She's so smart. But I'd like to ask you about shaping the ways forward for minerals and metals governance has been one of the priority issues of children and youth throughout the UNEP 7, a lot of people here. I have to run because I have a meeting, the presidents of COP30, and we are late, so it is in Brazil. It's a chaos, okay? I'm trying to manage different things at the same time, but I'll do my best. What have been the youth perspectives, okay? And coming, what are the young people demanding, and what unseen story would you like to bring to member states and stakeholders to push for a more ambitious transition plan to minerals stewardship? If you allow me to add you, it's not only the young people, how young people use to like to coordinate or be coming together with the generation that has the power today, okay? Be on the floor, ask to be there, because we are the future, if I understand, in the present.
Thank you, Isabella, for those grand questions. Hello, my name is Cohen, and I am a focal point for the Green Economy and Resources Working Group at the Children and Youth Major Group to UNEP, CYMG. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here, and at the same time, absolutely overwhelmed to be here, because minerals has been one of the biggest, one of the popular issues where we have mobilized so many young people to discuss and to come up with a harmonized position to actually take part in the negotiations process. Just as to pluck out a figure from our previous week at UNEA, the Youth Environment Assembly that we hosted last week, we have mobilized more than 1,000 youths. I think I'm getting the figures correctly. If you can correct me later on. And across those youth delegates that come absolutely from all around the world, we have been hosting countless informal and formal consultations amongst us and with the member states, with major groups, to actually come up with our priorities in this issue. And I'll probably share, there's a lot of priorities that we can mention, but I'll try and summarize them into 3 and also perhaps answer your question on how we can do better to coordinate amongst ourselves. So one of the very obvious observations that we have noticed is that youth absolutely sees this minerals issue as a justice issue, as you can see from this event title. what would our microphone, hello? I'll carry on with this, but if not, I'll ask for a mic from you. So it is absolutely a justice issue because it will be impacting our lifestyles, our communities, our natural habitats, and so on. But what we also notice is that we do not see this minerals issue just as solely as a justice issue. We do not see justice and economic development as something that is mutually exclusive. It absolutely goes hand in hand. But the reason why it has been so much of a challenge for us is that from the negotiations from the member states and frankly from how the negotiations are currently happening at the moment, it seems like the issue is being discussed unilaterally from the economic perspective. But we all know why this is unproductive, why this isn't the way that we would prefer to go ahead forward, because probably it's also one of the points that we've made throughout YA session at the technology and governance for mineral stewardship. We oftentimes notice our governments, our decision-making structures absolutely prioritizing economic benefits, like we are seeing at the moment for industry, for AI development, for defense, amongst the geopolitical tensions, that we are prioritizing absolutely the economic gains at the expense of the other resources, if I may, but also capital. So natural capital, social capital, cultural capital, they are absolutely being sacrificed at the expense of solely taking a step ahead in this minerals race. And we would like to start building a narrative that this justice and economic narratives are not mutually exclusive and they go absolutely hand in hand. Not only that the cost of social and natural capitals invokes economic price, but because of the leave no one behind principle that we all have to remind ourselves, whether that's within the national government, whether in the international system, the cooperation between the global north and the global south countries. And so, yes, we must acknowledge that there are absolutely challenges and sort of frustrations, if I may say, amongst the children and youth at how much of this justice element, and let alone how these two justice and development principles are intertwined, is not reflected at all in the ongoing negotiations. So that's where we can begin from. And second, like we heard from the previous speakers, like the point that Jurasa has made, perhaps there is no sustainable mining. And for us to move towards circular economy and circularity in mining and minerals and metals governance, we have to begin from less extraction. And less extraction means, like Isabella, you mentioned, acknowledging both supply and demand side approaches. Supply side approaches, it is crucial, nevertheless, because as we can see from anything from the consumer products like electronics to automotives to energy that we are consuming, there has to be diversified supplies for these minerals and metals, not coming from mines and virgin minerals mining, but also the secondary resources that we can claim from different resources. And as an instance, at the YA session, we actually invited a speaker from Indonesia who works in e-waste recycling, and they actually work extracting the secondary minerals and metals from the collected e-waste, which absolutely which is starting to mobilize the urban mine in Indonesia. And in a country where, like Indonesia, like elsewhere with big urban population, where we can actually provide these systematic measures to come up with diversified supply, not just from mines where we're actively harming ecosystems, but the minerals that we can actually capture and that are already in our hands, that will be an absolutely powerful and significant move to diversify the supplies. But at the same time, we also realized that demand-side approaches is absolutely crucial. We were actually hosting a conversation with Janez, also the co-chair of IRP, and between COIMG, on incorporating the principles of sufficiency. And this could be ranging from absolutely anything from reshaping our individual lifestyles and to the governments also reshaping their demands and their supplies of minerals. And lastly, I know you have to leave, so I'll wrap up my point. We cannot sacrifice our point on transparency and accountability principles, and not just on minerals and metals, but across anything that is actively calling for the demands of minerals and metals, including the AI developments. And so that actually has been one of the key things. Reporting and impact measurement mechanisms across the AI expansion has been one thing that we've been calling for at the resolution, which we hope to see, if not at this UNEP, at next UNEA at any other multilateral processes. And last but not least, how we're doing, where CYMG is actively convening and gathering, and we're also calling for national governments, like you mentioned Colombia, to step up if the progress out of multilateral systems are slow. So big issue, lots to discuss, but I'll leave it at there for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to welcome you. I'm sorry? It's unbelievable, no? The new generation. And yes, okay. And but look, 3 things. The first one, welcome to the new momentum of the world, because we cannot thrive and solutions without minerals. It's not only climate solutions, defense industries, okay, for example, digital technological age. It's not only AI. You have quantum intelligence coming in the next 5 years. This will change everything. We're fully dependent on resource, especially minerals, metals, and materials. Okay, this means that you have power politics into the rooms with us. Okay, you need to be prepared to dialogue in the high-level perspective, not only nationally, but also subnational players to understand, for example, going to cities and mobility, this is fully dependent on this, absolutely. And you have new supply chains of power and interests, okay? And that's why I welcome you so young, because the new generation that's here, to fight with us. Lígia, we are too old, but we are so young also, okay? Because we come from the last century, okay? Don't worry about this, okay? But it's true, because this is a really new generation that coming with really try to not only to put pressure on, but to have political rooms to play. Don't give up, okay? Go there, ask more than to asking today. My second point here is that don't forget that also have other dimensions of international cooperation, because we need to tackle, for example, organized crime, as you mentioned. And this means transnational perspectives. And this is not only, as in the past, bilateral regional perspectives. It's a new dimension of the complexities that are coming, because you need to manage this new age of solutions. Third, it's important to understand the movements outside our bubble. I'm sorry to use or cluster if you want to be more polite. What it means that we go, for example, in the AI, we need to understand the flows of investments on AI in the world, the trillions and trillions of dollars that's happening. We are locating this today, and this means that we have minerals behind, okay? It's very interesting when you check this, or when you go outside the multilateral system, when you're going to discuss, for example, climate politics, consider like-minded blocks, the blocks of countries that manage convergence of interests. I'd like to say that when going there, we are not discussing, for example, CBDR, okay? And this is an asset for multilateral system. So we have the new dynamics of the world that people coming, the same countries, the same people, putting apart some issues that value for us. So the dispute is really new, okay? And my last recommendation, we are really running to make sure that we can mobilize people based on truth, and we can have trust, and we can use multilateral environmental agreement synergies, et cetera, that we're looking forward to address. But I've mentioned earlier to Lígia, because she's my best friend, and I admire her a lot, because we need to learn that today what have in the rooms, 2 new things, the domestic issues will come to influence the international leadership. That's why we have the lack of the international leadership today. I'm sorry to say this. And second, okay, and when going to domestic issues, you cannot forget about democracy, et cetera, et cetera. But second, something really new is coming into our reality. It's not about the reality, it's about perception, okay? And how people indeed, the consumption is based on perception. The political consumption based on this, not necessarily based on the realities. So welcome to the future, enjoy, be happy, okay, and don't never give up, because you can fix more than you can see today, but I trust that you'll do your best, and I'm waiting for you in the future. Thank you very much for joining us. I invite, what's his name? Cuban, come here to end the process, and I do apologize because I have to go to a meeting in Brazil to discuss climate change and climate politics. I don't know what it means, but let's do it. Okay, thank you very much. Girls, I'm waiting for you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoy. I like it too much. I see you tomorrow, okay? You? It's for you.
I have very little for you, but just a small pin for
Oh,
children and youth
thank
media
you very
group.
much.
So thank you for
Here
doing
it is. Thank you.
So we are now at, I think, 7:27. We have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions from the floor if there are anyone interested. Any questions from the floor? Sorry? Thank you so much, Professor. Yes. Okay, so I think you can interact with the wonderful speakers after this. So thank you everyone for coming, and again, a very, very big thank you to the speakers. And yeah, we'll see you around the conference over the next few days. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.